Like in law school, we don't get any comms training of any kind, right? At all. And actually, I don't think law school particularly trains us to communicate well about law, actually. Putting aside all the other stuff you mentioned, how to write an objective memo, they spend so much time on like citations and how to really do this stuff from a technical standpoint, which is important. But they don't talk about it. They don't talk about the other stuff. How do you actually explain this stuff to someone who's not another lawyer in one of these very formal settings, court in particular, or maybe in a negotiation around a contract or a legislative hearing or something like that? They don't teach it at all. And so like we really come out of law school ill-equipped.
Is it possible to carve out a meaningful career in the law by following your passions? What's harder, building a nonprofit or a business? And I like this one. What do lawyers have to learn from animators? Today, we are joined on the abstract by my friend Adam Stofsky, founder of Briefly. Briefly helps organizations like Zoom, Oric, and Guild distill complicated legal concepts for their business and other non-nerdy lawyer stakeholders. Before starting Briefly, Adam was the founder and executive director of the new Media Advocacy Project, which uses video and narrative content to drive change around human and civil rights issues. He started his career in a slightly more traditional way as a clerk at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as a Skadden Fellow at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and doing litigation at Debevoise. A note to be fully transparent on this one, I've been working with Adam a little bit for a few months, advising Briefly on my own time because I like the mission. I think he's a cool and interesting guy, as you will learn. And I like working with cool and interesting people. So just wanted to tell y'all about that. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Tyler. Interesting, maybe. Cool, I'm not so sure about anymore. Let's see.
Well, cool means different things, right? Not everyone has to be a rock star.
We're literally cool today. It's like sort of 0 degrees up here in the Hudson Valley. So.
I don't always ask this question anymore. I used to ask it more often, but I think it's interesting given your career path and your career journey. Why did you want to become a lawyer? What drove you to go to law school?
It's interesting. I didn't want to become a lawyer. Actually, my mom was a teacher, right, for years. She was a single mom. I grew up with just my mom in Brooklyn in the 80s. And I ended up going to St. Anne's, this really nice private school, and she had to be able to afford it. And so she changed jobs and became a headhunter, like a legal recruiter, kind of in the 80s.
Huh.
So for my entire like late middle and high school years, she was like placing big law lawyers into, before that term existed probably, big law lawyers into other jobs at big law firms. And she just told me over and over again how miserable so many of these lawyers were. I had in my mind, like, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I can be anything but a lawyer. Because she saw, she saw this, frankly, kind of negative. People wanted to leave their jobs. But to answer your question, after college, I was a bit lost, didn't quite know what to do. Ended up traveling around the world for a year, just me and a backpack. $5,500. I was able to travel around the world for a year. This is in the very late 90s.
For a year?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I spent 3 of those months in India and another month and a half in Nepal. That helped. It was much cheaper back then. Yeah, it was pretty cool. But during that trip, I ended up finding my way to various kind of volunteering with various human rights organizations or like kind of relief organizations in various ways. Never realized you could like do that as a job, and got very interested in the idea of doing human rights work. Partly because, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I was just kind of compelled by the idea of doing this kind of work, and ended up kind of pursuing that. So I got home from this trip. I was really into rock climbing and mountain biking those days. So I got a job at Eastern Mountain Sports in Columbus Circle, and I was just like selling backpacks while trying to find a job. And this woman stumbled in with her wife, and they were trying to outfit themselves for a backpacking trip. And we were chatting, and she was the general counsel, or I think associate general counsel, at the Open Society Institute, which was what is now Open Society Foundations.
Sure.
Much different back then, but it was George Soros's foundation, one of the major funders of human rights work. We started chatting, and I said I was interested in doing human rights, and she said, "Well, why don't you come in for an informational interview?" And just fast forward about 6 months, she became my boss. Right, she hired me as a new legal assistant, and I was working in a general counsel's office of a big human rights foundation. Now, I didn't really love the general counsel type work. I was more interested in the substantive work, which I got involved in to some degree, but they kind of convinced me, if you want to do human rights work and you don't have a serious subject matter expertise in a particular country or region, the best way to do it is to become a lawyer, because the whole world of human rights has become legalized over the years. And so that's kind of why I went to law school. I had no particular other reason why. It's like, I want to do human rights work. This seems a good way in. And then when I got to law school, I actually loved it. I mean, I found law just really compelling as a subject. So, but that's how it happened.
How'd you end up at Debevoise? Because that to me is almost you would think of that as the most traditional part of your whole resume, and yet that's the thing that stands out as almost like the most distinct, or like the piece that, hearing this story too about your interest in human rights way predating law school, which I didn't really know. That's the thing that's different.
Yeah,
that's the odd man out,
right? Yeah. So, well, when I was in law school, I got sort of sucked into it, right? I loved it. I found it really interesting. And, I went to Harvard, right? There's a lot of kind of, to be honest, a cultural pressure and prestige pressure to do prestigious things. And one of those things is going to work at a big law firm. And so, and I kind of thought, well, I kind of want to do human rights work. Wouldn't it be great to like make a little bit of money beforehand to be able to do that without worrying? And so I kind of thought, well, I'll just do this. Sure. I'll do some on-campus interviews. I just picked like 3 or 4 firms that I knew had good pro bono programs and they could do the things I wanted. And these very charismatic partners at Debevoise, including this one guy, Mike Gillespie, who I think may have just either stepped down or taken an of-counsel role. Great guy, very charismatic. He just gave me the hard sell and said, you can do all these wonderful things at this firm. It's a lovely place to work. You should give it a shot. And so it was really this one guy that kind of talked me into it. And that's how I ended up there. I did interview at some other places, but I think, I don't know, once you get locked into a place, you get the idea that you could thrive there. That's where you end up going, So yeah, that's pretty much it. It was really down to the person.
Was it hard to leave and go back to human rights work? How did that come about? Was that a gradual sort of, then starting the new Media Advocacy Project, was that a gradual transition, or was that like I'm kind of over the big law thing. I need to do something different. I'm going to go and start this organization. How did that transition come about for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to give you like an honest answer, because it's interesting, right? Like you get, so I really didn't like big law life. Like I really did. So I clerked for the Ninth Circuit, and I was actually pretty bored during that job, which is already an indication that certainly at least a pellet away. Everyone around me loved it. I had these brilliant peers, obviously, these wonderful judges. I was not into it. It's not my I definitely needed a little more kind of action in my job. And then I went to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Scott Fellowship. Also, like, it was much, much better. I was much more in the thick of things. But I found what I was really compelled by was more the non-actual litigation work I was doing. I was doing a lot of Katrina relief work, like legal response to Katrina, which happened pretty much right after I started my job, and a bunch of other stuff. Even the fundraising I kind of found more interesting than I had done so many depositions and defended so many. By the time I finished my time there, I was just done with it. It was not. Yeah. And then at the firm, I really enjoyed aspects of it, but I found I knew I wasn't going to last long, and I think it wasn't to do with the people or the work. It was actually just physically, I physically didn't like sitting still that much. Everyone would just sit in their offices and just sit still and do stuff. This is why I hated depositions, because I just it would hurt my body to sit still for that long. Coffee in a deposition where other people love it. They love
Sitting
it.
kills. We know this now, right?
Sitting kills, exactly. Instead of standing depositions. Anyway, sorry, my God, I'm taking so long to answer this question. No, I knew I had this idea to start this organization that integrated video and multimedia storytelling into legal advocacy for years. And I think I knew I wanted to do it. And going to Debevoise was a way of kind of getting some private sector experience, making some money, and kind of just trying this thing before I did it. There were definitely moments in my best moments at the firm I thought, well, actually, like this is, maybe I'll do this for longer. But at the end of the day, I think I knew I was going to leave. And then what happened was the financial crisis hit. And everything kind of stopped, right? Debevoise and the other like elite firms weren't doing any lawyer layoffs. They may have done any staff layoffs, but they were really firm about that. And they made it clear we're not laying anyone off. But it just got kind of boring for a while. It was like partners negotiating conflict waivers for like 4 months, and like nothing was really going on. And the firm actually, I told some of the litigation partners, hey, I want to start this company that does this really interesting work with video and litigation. And they were incredibly supportive. Actually gave me like a research, like a billing code to like do research on evidence and ways of, and so they were really supportive. And I think they actually, they probably knew I was not going to be like one of their top performing partners. my guess is that for them, like, because they like to recruit, they want to recruit entrepreneurial lawyers, they want to get interesting people at their firm. Having more alumni go and start companies and interesting social enterprises, I mean, that's a huge win for them. So my guess is they were, I don't know, maybe not that sad to see me go. And but very happy I was doing something interesting. So they were incredibly supportive, actually.
Was starting this hard? Fundraising, figuring out how to make it work. I mean, what were the early days of starting that like before you'd built a team around you, or just trying to get it off the ground?
Starting NMAP, it was incredibly exciting. It was, I'm going to say, it was actually not that hard to start. But really hard to maintain, right? So I think that was a little lesson learned. I had like too much success early and luck early. So my first stroke of luck, and I say it really is luck, is I got this Echoing Green fellowship. I don't know if anyone in our audience is familiar with Echoing Green, but it's one of the first organizations that was doing like social entrepreneurship funding and really thought of themselves as a kind of startup funder for social enterprises, both nonprofit and for-profit. So they were an early funder of like Teach for America, for example, and I think City, a lot of other really interesting organizations. Some really great ones. And so I got that. It's hugely competitive. I kind of just applied on a whim. They don't give you a lot of, back then it was like literally $60,000 over 2 years. So it was a small amount of money, but it was a huge boost just prestige wise and access to other funders. And just a lot of our early funders saw that Echoing Green stamp of approval. It's like getting that really good early investor, right? That just
totally Sequoia's on your cap table, and like the money just flows in, and the customers are like, "Well, they must be good."
Totally, it's a bit like that. I mean, you might even call like Echoing Green sort of like the Sequoia of that more kind of niche world. So that was great, and also I got to meet all these other entrepreneurs. It was very exciting. I didn't know anything about business actually, and like I learned a ton. So that was a real boost. And then we just started getting all these other funders. We got a bunch of big human rights funders early. Our work was interesting. It was very visually compelling. But then, we could have a whole podcast on the many mistakes I made. But long story short, when you're raising money from like big institutional funders, we got funding from the MacArthur Foundation, Hewlett, Oak Foundation, Open Society. I mean, we got a lot of the big ones, and it was exciting, but it's very hard to sustain that, right? Like they wanted like results and data really quickly. And when you're doing this kind of soft intervention in human rights, like it's really hard you're not going to get great data in 1 year or 2 years or even maybe 5. It's really hard. And so they were demanding what we really couldn't deliver. And then, a lot of the grants didn't continue. I mean, some did. But some didn't. So it was really, really hard to sustain. I overhired, I made all the mistakes kind of newbie founders make. So starting it was actually not, it was from a business standpoint, not that hard. Sustaining it from a business standpoint was very hard because you're relying on a small number of larger funders. One more thing I'll say about doing this kind of human rights work, especially the work that actually emotionally, it was really hard to sustain well, right? I didn't realize that it was just, we were editing videos about, kind of torture cases and gender-based violence. And we did this whole thing on the Haiti cholera epidemic, and people are just dying of cholera in huge number. It was just really emotionally difficult to sustain, which is something I didn't realize I should have, right? It seems obvious, but it didn't. So that was another interesting challenge.
And when is this happening? I mean, like when are you doing this? And I ask, to say, you're creating this video content, is it like documentaries? Is it like, as social media is emerging to raise awareness on social, like sort of like what, waves are you riding, or like, how are you trying to generate this sort of awareness and impact?
Yeah, it's so interesting looking back now with video being just ubiquitous, right?
Right.
So I got started doing this in law school. So it was my 1L summer.
Hmm.
I met this really cool like doctoral student at Harvard Law School, this guy, Felix Morka, who's a really brilliant Nigerian human rights activist. I want to do something like seriously adventurous my 1L summer. So he ran this human rights organization in Lagos. And I thought, well, wow, that would be really cool. Like Lagos, that's like a crazy place to go.
Yeah.
So I asked him for a job, and he did all this work on economic, social, and cultural rights, so particularly housing. And so they did all this work on these huge forced evictions in Lagos, of which there were many during the dictatorships in kind of the 80s and 90s. There were a lot of just mass demolitions of houses. So I went over there, and my job was to write do some research, empirical research, and write a new human rights report about a community called Morocco, which was a sort of almost like a town of 300,000 people that had been demolished by the Lagos government, and a core group of them had kind of stuck around and had been fighting for their rights for years, right? So my job was to kind of do some research and kind of develop new legal theories of why these folks are entitled to homes, basically, or cover. Anyway, I brought this video camera with me. This was like even before digital SLRs became a thing. It was like this old school camcorder. And I kind of taught myself how to shoot documentary style interviews. And I actually got some training from some local Nigerian journalists. I sought them out. And I just started interviewing my clients just kind of for fun. It was like a little fun side project. But they were so compelling on camera that I thought, well, this is interesting. What if we like actually try to use their voices to pressure the government to like settle this case? So I brought it to my boss, and he's like, yeah, let's try it. You still need to write the human rights report, but do the videos. Anyway, I shot like 35 hours of footage. I spent pretty much my whole 2L year like teaching myself how to edit using one of the original like Final Cut Pros on my little laptop. For any editors out there, you would have to like wait every little like 5-second crossfade. You would just like sit there while it rendered for like 10 minutes. It would take how old I am. So anyway, I made this documentary. It was like an hour long. It was broken up into little chunks, sent it back to Nigeria, and we basically scared the pants off the Lagos government and actually began to settle out a slice of the case. That's the long story short. That gave me the idea, like, wow, maybe this video thing could really make a difference for lawyers, right? And so that's where I got the idea of starting NMAP. And so that's what we did. We really we did a variety of things, mostly like short form documentary style videos, storytelling style videos, to do several things, like pressure opponents to settle like we did in Lagos, like kind of outside of litigation. In litigation, create sort of demonstrative evidence or other kinds of evidence. A lot of the international courts don't really have evidence rules, don't really have hearsay rules, so you can kind of do more storytelling. And then also for community education. So we would do, in addition to doing the advocacy work, we kind of educate communities on their legal rights. That some of that is like the sort of DNA of what we're doing at Briefly now. But the whole idea was everything needed to be either really short, because we're literally like chasing some African Commission for Human Rights judge and their clerks who have like 90 seconds to watch something, or it had to be simplified for people who had no experience with law, like all those villagers in Haiti who were being impacted by this cholera epidemic that was spread by the UN. So we simplified things and we shortened things and made them emotionally compelling.
You talk about this work being emotionally exhausting. I mean, I've gotten to know you a little bit. I mean, I think you're actually like a pretty you're very intellectually curious, but you're sort of like a logical, very rational person who wants to, make things happen and drive things forward. Like, did you end up liking this work in retrospect? Was that emotional side of it challenging, like really challenging to deal with? And is that something that sort of like drove you away from it eventually? I don't know. I'm just curious, who is this right for, basically? Like, who, like what personality type is going to go and is going to really for a long time find fulfillment doing human rights work? That's almost the question.
I'm thinking it's a very well framed question. I mean, I think I had to think about how to answer this. So from the business side, things, I did not like it. Right, I did not like
Mm.
raising money from foundations. It's actually really exciting because you like kind of get to get the money before you do the thing, and like they give you a lot of money, but you sell a dream. Right, it's a wonderful model to
Yeah.
some degree. It can lead to some incredible results, but I ended up finding it kind of arbitrary, very frustrating. I felt like our funders didn't really have a sense of how our business worked. Little things
Mm.
like the way there'd be a big gap between one grant ending and the new one starting, and it's like I got this payroll I've got to cover every month. I'm like I can't just ask them to go away for 3 months and come back. Things like that were really, and that's everyone. I mean, if there's any nonprofit EDs or like COOs or any manager, they'll know what I'm talking about. Like it's really
Yeah.
frustrating, right? So there was that, and I think that actually also played a feeling of instability, made all the other stuff, emotional challenges, worse. Um,
Hmm.
I don't think it's really right for me in the long term, this kind of human rights work. I don't know that it's really right for anyone. It's really, really hard.
Hmm.
There are certainly people who are kind of more thrill seeking. I have a friend who's a former special forces soldier. I have
Whoa.
a good friend who's like a firefighter, paramedic, and he's like in the late 50s now, has been doing it forever, or mid 50s. Folks like that who have a more thrill seeking kind of personality, I could see them doing well with this. I think it's just but I don't know. I mean, I think about like folks at larger human rights organizations,
Hmm.
and I think there's a lot of trauma in those organizations too. I would imagine. I think there is,
Hmm.
but I remember getting interested in kind of trauma in the workplace. I think it was an organization. I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it's the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, or Trauma and Journalism at Columbia Journalism School, and they had published all this interesting research on like the impact of covering wars and conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan
Hmm.
among journalist organizations. Like how did, like, especially like there's editors editing video
Yeah.
in Manhattan, and like they're never set foot in Afghanistan, but they're getting like these PTSD symptoms. And actually, there was an interesting story about like I think it was like game developers working on. We work. My co-founder at Briefly is a former game developer, so we're plugged into that world a little bit. And there was I think it was folks working on like a Mortal Kombat game. So the animators
Oh.
ended up because they were looking at reference images of like these horrible, gruesome.
Yeah.
That
Right.
we were actually getting kind of PTSD symptoms as well. Really interesting, right? So
Yeah.
um, anyway, all this is to say is the research I saw indicated that like having like essentially like a stable work environment with predictable like comp schedule management, those are the things that built resilience to trauma more than moral commitment, more than like
Yeah.
emotional support from your colleagues, a kind of stability. So I think there's
You
no
almost didn't have that either, right? Like you're
didn't have
fighting every 6 months to get funded, and yeah.
it was
Huh.
just me, like, and a bunch of people running. It was very loosey goosey. So, I mean, lesson learned, like strong, good management, good institutions, good support.
Hmm.
I think so. I guess I would say I don't know if there's any like kind of person that's good for this kind of work, but good organizations are good for this kind of work.
That's really interesting. And you think about the great work that a lot of small nonprofits do out there, but then you also sort of think about how financially precarious that work often is for the people who are literally going and they're the ones who are going and bringing the meal or the socks or whatever to the homeless or unhoused person, right? Or they're the one who's out there in the field doing the field. Yeah, you think about oftentimes those people don't have a huge safety net, and I can imagine how that would be really tough.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
brutal. I mean, actually, and this is I work with a lot of excuse me. I know a lot of farmers because I live up in the Hudson Valley. My wife Anna
Hmm.
is a farmer. And farmers they don't run well. Actually, there are some nonprofit farmers up here, but those are actually ironically the best resource because they're like funded by a philanthropist. But so all these local farmers up here, I think they don't run nonprofits, but they live with that same kind of precarity, and they also
Hmm.
serve vital public interest. So it's not just a nonprofit for profit thing; it's more like any kind of small organization. Um,
Right.
anyway, interesting.
Okay, I want to ask you about the farm in a second, but last question on New Media Advocacy Project. What are you most proud of having accomplished there?
It's a good question. I think what I'm most proud of, there's two things I would say. One is the team we put together. I just found this group of incredible people who wanted to do this work and not get paid a lot of money to do it.
Mm-hmm.
People who are really creative and real, and so, and we had people who are living in Nigeria, living in Mexico, and living here in the U.S. Those were where our kind of main centers were, and it was just a great group of people, and that's where I learned how to develop teams. I learned how to to some extent how to manage, and so I think that's easily the thing I'm most proud of. It's usually what I'm most proud of whenever I
Yeah.
do anything, but the other thing I'll say is, like, I have to look back. We had some real impact on a number of cases, particularly this Haiti cholera case, among others. But just, I think the act of bearing witness is really important. And we interviewed hundreds of people who'd
Mm-hmm.
gone through terrible situations, whether it's like, they're serious stuff, some of the stuff I mentioned: torture, gender-based violence, disability issues, all kinds of stuff in countries like Armenia, Georgia, India, Nigeria, South Africa, Mexico. And so I think just that act of sitting and listening and recording stories was really powerful. Even if the ultimate impact in some of those cases was not massive on their actual legal case, it's really hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think just being there to bear witness is really, it's just really important. I'm quite proud of that.
Someone told the story for the historical record.
Or someone has listened even in that moment.
Yeah.
It's important too.
Do you think of yourself like you're leaving this, and we'll get to in a second? Like, I mean, I want to talk about the farm. I want to talk about Briefly. You're moving on to the next thing. I mean, at this point in your life, do you even think of yourself as a lawyer anymore? Is that really the first thing that you would think of, or the way that you would describe yourself, or has your view of yourself changed a bit?
I think I always thought of myself as a lawyer, even though I hadn't practiced law in a long time. And it was a central part of what I think makes my enterprises interesting, right? It's like the sort of very deep merging of sort of creative professions and law. I think if you lose the law, you lose a bit of what's special about it. And I think so. I've always I still identify as a lawyer, to some degree. I really don't. I'm not a very good lawyer. You don't want to make it like. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. Maybe if I'd not been a litigator, I would have done better. But I'm just, you don't want me defending you and or prosecuting or being involved in your civil case. It doesn't work for me. But no, I think I still do think of myself. I think I always did throughout this, and yeah. I think I still do think about it. I think I never really lost that.
Mm-hmm. So tell us how you ended up on a farm in Hudson, New York. What led you there? I think it's one of the interesting things about you, and I think it's also something that clearly has shaped Briefly and the way that you've built the business. And we'll get into that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, all right. So this is, I don't know. I've been up here 15 years now. It's still kind of. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn in like the 80s, right? Like I lived in like Boston and San Francisco and DC and New York. It's just kind of, it's still crazy. So no, so I left Debevoise, right? So like I left after a few years. My then fiance, we got married. We had this like awesome loft on 22nd and 5th, right by the Flatiron Building. It was super cool, with a few other people. So left my job, like literally like got married at City Hall and like gave that apartment up like in the same week. Let's just do it all at once. And then we went to this like awesome like 9-week honeymoon, like driving around the West, because I kind of knew I was going to start. I'd already had a fellowship, right? So I knew I had a little bit of this Echo and Green fellowship I mentioned. I knew I had a little bit of money, and obviously working at Debevoise in the mid-aughts was a good way to make some money. So I wasn't like financially worried, but I thought, let's live. My mom had a little house up in the Berkshires, and I thought, let's like go crash there for a few months and live rent free while I kind of get this thing going, and then we can move back to the city and do the thing that normal people do, right? They go. So we moved it. We just crashed my mom's little place. Actually, I think she may have charged me rent now that I think about it. It wasn't and my wife she's English, so she was waiting for her green card to clear. So she kind of couldn't really work a normal job. So she wanted to find some volunteer stuff. So she was interested in farming and livestock. We'd actually visited one of my clients at at NMAP, who actually the guy who'd become my first client, this guy, Brian Concanon, who runs the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. Amazing organization, amazing guy. We had visited him and his wife. Sorry, the story is going to get a little crazy. So on our road trip, we went all around the country. This guy, Brian, lived in this place called Joseph, Oregon, which is like this idyllic community in the near Hell's Canyon, like in northeastern Oregon in the Wallowa Mountains. Absolutely gorgeous. I had no idea this place existed. We went to visit him, and he had this half acre market garden, right? That he and his wife kind of just manage. And he runs a human rights organization in the mountains. It was totally crazy. I'd never seen this before. And I think my wife got really inspired by this garden. She's like, wow, on a half an acre, essentially you have a little farm. She was absolutely fired up. I think she was getting ideas. Fast forward a couple of weeks, we landed in the Berkshires. She wanted to kind of get involved with some agriculture. So we just went to the farmer's market and we're asking around with all these people, hey, do you need help on your farm? And this one guy, this guy named Sean Stanton, who's a wonderful farmer in the Berkshires, he said, sure, show up, 6 a.m. on this day. Turns out he actually farmed one of the Dan and Dave Barber's family farm from the Blue Hill kind of universe. So he was plugged into this whole food thing. It was all very exciting. Within a week, she was getting up at 5 a.m. to go milk cows at their dairy. I've never seen a person take to something so naturally. It was kind of ridiculous. We've been married for 2 months. I'm like, what are you doing? You're going off with this other dude to go milk cows. And Sean is this very strapping, handsome farmer. But it was great. She loved it. She said she wanted to stay up in the country. She's like, hey, can we stay here? And I was like, are you out of your mind? Live up here. But it really genuinely scared me. I was already feeling a bit isolated, kind of trying to raise money and start this thing. It was actually really scary, without having any, entrepreneurs, there's a reason why most of them live in big cities, right? Thrive on that kind of community support. But I said, all right, well, let's look around. Her idea was to live closer to Hudson, where the Amtrak train is, and so we found this farm called Kinderhook Farm, where we still live, in a little town called Ghent. And I called them up and said, hey, we're looking for houses in your area. Can we get a tour of your farm? And they said, actually, we have a house for rent on the farm. Why don't you come take a look? And it turns out that the manager of the farm, this guy, Lee Ranney, I'm introducing all these characters here. So this guy, Lee, well, no, but seriously, this whole time in my life, it's how is my life how did it get so interesting? All this stuff just happened.
You could have just been living in Chelsea and working in a skyscraper, and instead,
I know. Oh my God, I think about it sometimes. Anyway, so this guy Lee ran the farm. His wife Georgia, they ran this farm. Turns out Lee is an ex-lawyer, so he went to University of Michigan and practiced as a pretty serious corporate lawyer in Detroit, in the 80s, doing leverage buyouts and just doing all kinds of stuff. And then at the age of, so I felt safe with him, right? It's he's this lawyer. So then and then around the age of 40, he just quit to go raise cattle. He grew up on a farm, in the western part of Michigan. And he was like, you know what? I don't want to do law anymore. So he and his wife moved to West Virginia and they started raising calves, basically. And so they had a cattle there. Anyway, they had another friend who was an investor, bought a bunch of land up in the Hudson Valley, and then decided to start this farm and called Lee in Georgia and said, you want to come farm this with me? And thus they started Kinderhook Farm up here. And so I felt very safe with this guy. I was like, yeah. Oh. And so the idea of living on a farm, with a community around, some people that I was comfortable with, was very compelling. So we rented this place, and within a year, my wife, Anna, had created a job for herself on the farm. They had a bunch of sheep. She was interested in sheep. And then she ended up getting a job as a shepherd, literally, among other things, and grew this operation into one of the kind of most impressive kind of grass-fed lamb operations in the Hudson Valley. So that's kind of how, and we're still here 15 years later.
And I mean, well, my only experience, to be honest, with farming is I watched the show that Jeremy Clarkson did called Clarkson's Farm. I don't know if you've seen it. Being a farmer is hard. This is not easy work. And also somewhat emotionally challenging as animals get sick and die and you have to make decisions,
every day they're making life and death decisions all the time. I mean, Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I've seen a bit of the show. Actually, I mean, it's a little unrealistic because he has a backstop of a lot of resources,
Well,
obviously.
yeah. I mean, the guy's super wealthy, so it's kind of a
No,
yeah.
but I think he does raise a lot of the issues that it's really, really hard.
Hmm.
But I will say, like, as an entrepreneur, right? I've now been an entrepreneur for, I don't know, 15, 18 years, however long it's been. I mean, when you live around farmers, you live around like ultimate entrepreneurs, right? That's what
Right.
they are. They live and breathe it. They're hustling all the time. So that was really exciting. And that has been, I think my view of what entrepreneurship has been really exciting. I mean, it might be one of the reasons why we're still bootstrapping briefly, right?
Hmm.
It feels more possible seeing what these farmers do.
Being an entrepreneur is not all about going to Y Combinator, although that's great, or raising $7 million and then $25 million and then $50 million. There are a lot of other businesses, great businesses that you can build in a very different way.
Well, most
Uh,
businesses really,
most,
right?
yeah.
Probably 99.5% of businesses, I'm guessing. I don't really know, but something like that, right?
So where does Briefly fit in, and how did Briefly come about? Where did this idea to help, and I mentioned at the outset some of your corporate clients, but you also work with a lot of sort of legal aid organizations. Where did this idea to take somewhat complicated legal concepts or processes, turn them into fun animations, trainings, distill them for people who are not lawyers or who do not want to, dig in deep and understand the concept of an indemnity, right? Where did this idea come about?
Indemnity. Yeah. So it came out of, I think it was a natural kind of growth
Yeah.
from NMAP, right? So we were like explaining legal issues to try to win cases. And I think we just got really good. Just got good at it. I got really good at at explaining this stuff quickly. I got really good at putting together teams of creatives to make these little short explainer videos. That's
Mm-hmm.
hard to do, right? And I was like, oh, I can actually find these people and that's mush together the peanut butter and jelly of kind of technical, legal, and business knowledge with kind of this exciting, all these creative skills. So I kind of got good at it. And then, I got frustrated with some of the advocacy work we were doing. Like, it's really hard to win big human rights cases. It takes forever.
Yeah.
But actually, educating people about what their rights are, preventing these issues, that was really compelling. So I already had, even just a few years into NMAP, I had this idea that we could kind of do this. And then we ended up getting a project with essentially a coalition of legal aid organizations led by a clinic at Fordham Law School, and by this really wonderful lawyer and law teacher named Dora Galakatos, who I don't know if she still runs the Feerick Center over there. Really great group of people. They were so after the financial crisis, there was a huge epidemic of, as you would imagine, like consumer debt cases
Mm-hmm.
in the courts in New York. Literally hundreds of thousands of cases. And these organizations, the law school clinics and legal aids, had set up this kind of coalition of groups to kind of show up in court and just try to help people. Because usually these cases, right, the debt collectors use the courts kind of as like a debt collection system, right, to help them
Right.
collect on these debts. They're often the third
Forcing
party
function of sorts. Yeah.
exactly, right. So it was just all a bit. It all felt a bit lawless and weird. And usually, if someone just shows up to court, the case gets dropped because that's not how these guys thrive on default judgments. This is my
Right.
memory of how this works, right? So they sue 1,000 people at once. Most don't show up. They're able to collect some of the money, and then they make a bit of money off the debt that they bought. I think that's how the model worked. Anyway, but they were drowning in thousands and thousands of people. And so we put together this idea of actually creating video content to help the lawyers educate people about their rights kind of before they met with them, or provide public information. So that still remains it was a really cool project. And that's kind of how this whole idea got started, and how I thought, well, actually, maybe if we're clever about how we teach people about law, we can solve a big problem at scale, right? Not trying to win this one case, but if we can just get 1% of people who are being sued for consumer debt to actually just show up or answer their complaint and the case gets dropped.
Right.
huge ROI for whatever this project costs, a huge impact. So,
Right.
so it kind of came out of our work. It wasn't the natural kind of work we did at NMAP, but it was kind of came out of it. And then I thought, well, this feels like a company. People should pay
Yeah.
us to do this. And also, I was getting really sick of like foundation fundraising and, and getting really interested in tech. I had a lot of friends who were starting tech companies at the time. And so I thought, all right, I'm gonna do this. And so I kind of I decided to leave NMAP. I handed it off to an amazing, wonderful guy who was our successor, Steve Stein, and moved on to start Briefly. So going back to this fundraising idea. So I was like this nonprofit dude. So you go to like foundations and you go say, hey, I need $500,000 to do this exciting thing. So I kind of thought that's how I'm going to do Briefly, right? That's what I knew how to do. And I very quickly learned two things. One is that it doesn't really work that way. I guess it could. I don't know. I've never I've not raised VC money, right? I've raised a lot of non-foundation, but never. So it's kind of hard to just sell a dream. You have to show an actual. You have to show the
product, revenue, customer growth. Yeah,
a credible path. I had none of that, right? I was like selling dreams, and I wasn't actually raising money. I was more just having individual conversations with folks, and I was really being told, "Yeah, that's not gonna fly. You got to really change the way you're thinking about this." And then I just kept hearing all these kind of horror stories about people raising too much money, and then like the laws of economics crashing hard, and so when we started Briefly. I think this was my first real lesson in entrepreneurship, like real. I say that nonprofit entrepreneurship is not real entrepreneurship, but real starting a for-profit company. So we had this, I just had my first child at the time, and I was trying to think through, okay, how this legal information thing, how is it actually going to make money? Like, how are we going to actually get paid to do this? So what we landed on was this idea of making legal content around life events. This is how it all got started. So I thought, did you know this, Tyler? I'm not sure if you do. So I still think these ideas are really cool. So so the idea was, okay, like the way the legal profession kind of works, it's all based around these like very legalistic practice areas. You have estate planning lawyers and family lawyers and they're very education lawyers. They're very cabin in their practice area, very specialized. And also kind of law is often separated from like things like personal finance or benefits, employee benefits. My thought was, excuse me, let's unify all of that stuff, but around actual life events, like the way people live their lives. Having a kid, becoming a caregiver to a disabled parent, returning from active duty, or going through a natural disaster. These things, let's pull together law, all the different legal areas, personal finance, employee benefits, and sell it to companies as a kind of benefit, fertilizer, right? Sort of thing. So we actually had some really promising leads. It was really interesting. But I knew I was going to have to raise VC money to actually to get an MVP to make it really credible. Right. And so, but I was already getting the idea that I wasn't really sure I wanted to do this. I don't know if I want to because I just wasn't sure it was going to work. Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure it was going to work. And I just didn't feel comfortable taking money if I didn't if I wasn't, maybe not sure is too strong, but if I was really uncertain that this could really
conviction. Yeah.
And I was like, I don't feel, that feels weird to me.
Yeah.
So we're still plugging away at it. We had a couple of really good potential customers. And then but it turns out at the same time, we were, like I mentioned, that consumer debt project we did, we were kind of getting, this is me and my co-founder who I had met. He was, Scott is a former, he was, as I mentioned, he was a video game developer and UI UX designer for many years, wanted to get out of that, do something creative. He got excited by this. He had done some animation work for us in the past. And so he got excited about this. He became my co-founder. So he was the art and design guy and I was the law guy. And we were kind of doing just some side hustle projects with the New York State courts, the New York City small claims court, to help them educate court users about their new online dispute resolution system. A couple legal aids were giving us money to make some explainer videos to help educate the public. And I remember it was in September of 2019. I I'm gonna say, looking back, this is definitely the correct call to make. Looking at what happened, it's like, you know what, this life event thing is cool, but like, why don't we like do more of what we're already making money doing? Like, people are paying us like real money to do this. Let's do more of that. And that was like the pivotal moment that I think made Briefly into Briefly, right? Instead of chasing an idea that was never going to happen, really, we started doing more of what was actually making us money. And so I did a webinar, the multimedia content crash course for lawyers, which we still do all the time. And I like tucked it away in like late December. I was like, if I just I want to like screw it up the first time with just a few dimes. I probably got like 15 people. I sent the invite out to a bunch of listservs, especially with delayed access to justice world that I was plugged into, and 450 people signed up for the thing.
Whoa.
So I like panicked. I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my God, I have to buy a new webcam. I have to like figure out how to do this. What do I host? I have to upgrade my Zoom account. Like, what do I do? And it went really well. And that just kind of, things were off and running. We had a list. We had all these organizations interested. And so we kind of shelved the life event stuff, thankfully, because like 2 months later, the pandemic happened, and HR folks were not concerning themselves with buying expensive, new, innovative benefits. They were trying to survive. And then meanwhile, everyone was trapped at home needing more content. And so we started making legal explainer videos, mostly for legal state courts and legal aid organizations. And that's kind of how it really got going about 5 years ago.
So that's an interesting thread to pull on, and something that you and I have talked a bit about before and have some ideas around, which is I think a lot of lawyers that we both know are trained to be persuasive, are trained in argumentation. But you talk about, a multimedia crash course. Law school, law firms, the practice of law doesn't necessarily train you to be a great sort of like broader communicator, to have the instinct to write 3 bullets for your CEO instead of a 3-page memo, or to make sure that you're well lit and your audio is clear when you're speaking on a Zoom call with your colleagues, recognizing that like maybe a bunch of your coworkers are a little bit scared of you because you're the general counsel of the company, and they think that not all the time, but sometimes when the general counsel is on the call, that means that something's going wrong or someone's going to get in trouble, right? Those are just 2 sort of like cliche examples, I think. But yeah, let's talk about this a little more, this idea of Briefly not just sort of distilling complicated legal concepts, but also helping lawyers communicate better and communicate with people broadly in like ways that they actually understand or that resonate with them or that are empathetic to them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, right? Like in law school, we don't get any comms training of any kind, right? At all. And actually, I don't think law school particularly trains us to communicate well about law, actually. Putting aside all the other stuff you mentioned. Like, for example, we're working on this incredibly cool project with Albany Law School now. We're actually helping them build their new Flex JD program. They mostly online JD. Super innovative. It's a great group of faculty, a great group of people. And we're working on this. We're doing the first year lawyering class now. It's basically the same first year lawyering, like legal writing and research class I had, when I was a 1L. And they're like, they're still teaching a lot of the same stuff, how to write an objective memo, like how to distinguish a case, all that stuff. And I do think that's important. I actually think even though like not many objective memos are going to be written by humans in the coming years, because that's probably one thing that Gen AI is really good at, I do think the discipline is still important, right? Like, I don't know if photographers like still learn to use dark rooms just as part of their discipline. I don't know. Like you can imagine that still being useful as part of training, even though you're not going to use it as a professional. But like, but they don't really. You learn that stuff really rigorously in law school. How to write an objective memo. They spend so much time on like citations and how to really do this stuff from a technical standpoint, which is important. But they don't talk about it. They don't talk about the other stuff. How do you actually explain this stuff to someone who's not another lawyer in one of these very formal settings, the court in particular, or maybe in a negotiation around a contract or a legislative hearing or something like that? They don't teach it at all. And so like we really come out of law school ill-equipped to talk about this, what we have expertise in. In fact, we kind of become like, it changes our language, right? We start using all kinds of funny words without realizing it. I think law school really changed how I talked for a
Mm-hmm.
time.
I mean, I know that you have a personal, you like games, you like video games, your co-founder is a video game developer. I'm curious what you think. And then you have this ability to not just talk to lawyers, right? But to work with the animators or work with the voice actors to make these videos. I'm curious if there's anything that you think that lawyers have to learn from, folks who are in those more creative disciplines or the animators or voice actors of the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many things that I think lawyers have to learn. It's kind of, and I think, but I think lawyers know that, right? It's why like these webinars we do. I'm always amazed at how many people show up to them. There's a thirst for this kind of knowledge, a thirst for. Part of it's like just wanting to learn to communicate better, but also it's using technology in interesting ways to communicate better. So yeah, I think there's a lot. There's so many things that lawyers have to learn. That was a bit of a softball question, but yeah, like so. For example, we have this wonderful slide we use where we show like a legal document. It's like a big block. It's like a law review article, I think, and it's just huge blocks of text, and it's great writing, right? It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But then we show what a graphic designer sees, like learning what they learned in their first day of their grad. And it's just these ugly boxes that are disorganized and awkward, like anxiety inducing, right?
Yeah.
So I think all the ways in which words exist beyond like the words themselves, how they're presented, where you're seeing them, is really important to like the level of like stress or comfort you're inducing in the whoever's watching it. And that's really, or reading them or listening to them. Mm-hmm. And that's really important for persuasion, right? I think like, I think the best litigators understand they need to like communicate with some like in their briefing or whatever, their motion with some like busy clerk who's got a million other things to do. And so they know how to like really write concisely and persuasively, knowing like almost the physical environment in which this clerk exists, right? They know, all right, this clerk got 2 minutes, they've got this time. I want to make it as easy for them as possible to say yes. So I think kind of taking that way of thinking and broadening it out into really engaging with how are your like, you're in the business of communication, you're in the business of persuading. How do you do that in the universe of everything else aside from just the legal argumentation? Mm-hmm. And that's what I think. And I think especially, I think all creative professionals are good at this, but I think video games in particular, I think are good at a real concise, like economical communication of ideas, often complex ones. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like this. I love that we work with these game devs on this. It's a really cool skill set they have. The ability to communicate something arcane and, video games are weird, right? There's all this complex stuff and they can communicate it often in 3 seconds. And I think that's really interesting.
How have Briefly's customers evolved over time? And sort of, where do you want to take the business over the next year or two?
So we started off working primarily with state courts and legal aid organizations to do more of the stuff we were doing in that consumer debt case, right? So we were focusing on public education, kind of scaling the work of what these lawyers can do. And then we pretty quickly saw the applications of this for the private sector. So started working with more in-house teams, as you mentioned, some of the wonderful clients that we have that you mentioned, and law firms as well, tackling a whole variety of other problems. How can we speed up the B2B sales process in a whole variety of ways by improving understanding of contract terms, either by customers and counterparties or by sales teams, procurement teams? Can we kind of avoid the many mistakes that can slow down a deal?
Sure.
Particularly around things like, you mentioned indemnities. I mean, this is like that's going to be a thorn in commercial lawyers and salespeople's sides for a long time. But like just at the margins, like speed things up. There's a huge amount of value there. Better compliance training. We live in an increasingly complex world. Like, can we make the sort of often unfun business of compliance training and education just much more engaging and more useful and actually reduce risk? There's a gajillion different use cases that we're exploring in our work. It's really fun. Now we're focusing now on things like law firm profitability. Can we educate? So lawyers don't get educated in comms. They also don't really get educated in business, or at least most of them don't, right? So this is a real problem, right? Like helping lawyers get a set of both soft and hard skills, actually, to better communicate value to their clients, to understand how to do things like billing and invoicing, just understand the way law firms make money and operate as good businesses. That's another use case we're tackling now, where I think there's a ton of value. So I think where we are now is in a period of great growth and creativity, really engaging with customers on what are all the things that good short information can do to make my business better. It's really fun.
Mm-hmm.
We're also, in the legal aid side of our work, really trying to not just create better public education and do those wonderful things, but really make the work of lawyers more efficient. Can we actually help these organizations represent more clients because their meetings are a little shorter because they're not explaining stuff over and over again? Or can we make their meetings better so they can focus more on the actual facts of that client's case instead of explaining the basics? We can offload some of that to kind of a client onboarding experience, all kinds of stuff. So that's where we are now, right? Is in this period, I think, of real, and it has challenges, right? It's not like we have our contracts product and we have our law. We're kind of doing we're really operating almost as a kind of tech-enabled agency now, right? Thinking through these very deep problems. So then to go to the rest of your question, like sort of where do we see the business going? So I think there are several things that we're trying to do. One is, I'd say the main thing we want to do is kind of platformize this to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make it, partly just to make it a little more scalable for us, but to also give when we make all this wonderful custom content, right? And we think because all these AI tools are making our process cheaper and easier on the production side of things, we think we can like beat the price of many subscription-based like video libraries, compliance libraries over a time window of say 3 to 4 years. Right? So our work is a bit expensive, but it's fully customized and begins to pay for itself very quickly. And our hope is to get a bit of a platform environment where clients can much more easily manage their own content, integrate the content they make with us, integrate the content into pretty much every SaaS platform they have, whether it's their CLM, their CRM, their intranet, their LMS, whatever it is, to make it seamless, and also to edit and update content easily, right? So an executive leaves, it's very easy for us to like slot a new person in, give them a very easy way to do that that's very affordable. So kind of really productizing and platformizing. These are like kind of cheesy words, but you get what I'm saying. I think that's where we're looking for the next couple of years.
And I think AI is going to make some of that customization, or if not annual, even more frequently, sort of updating easier, which I think is a huge tailwind to ride potentially over the course of the next year or two.
Look, we've gone 56 minutes and now we're first mentioning AI.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah. It is worth noting that it's like we use a lot of AI tools, and it's like for a little while I wondered, well, is this like a major threat to Briefly? Like, are people going to be like making their own videos using AI? And I really think like what we do is really hard to do well. No one's going to be going into like some video app that comes out next year and saying, make me an awesome video explaining the indemnity provision in my contract. It's not going to happen, but it's pushing our costs down significantly and making our ability to respond, to change things. It's great. It's amazing, actually, what we're able to offer our and I think the move towards custom is really interesting. And that's where I see things going. I think it's going to go that way with apps as well. Like it's, it's going to be much, much easier to make your own kind of custom LMS or whatever you want to make, in the next, I don't know if it's 2 years, but 5 years, I would imagine.
A widget for every problem and every company and every need. Yeah.
I think so, right? I mean, we don't know yet, but it certainly seems much more possible than it ever did before.
All right. Some fun questions for you as we start to wrap up. The first one, and I ask these of pretty much all of our guests, your favorite part of your day-to-day?
Oh my God. There is no day-to-day. It's always so different. I think my favorite part of my day-to-day is when I get to like talk to our customers about a new idea, right? It's really fun, right? Or like the project kickoff meetings, right?
Yeah.
Everything is like a blank slate. And a lot of these folks are lawyers, or they're kind of legal ops people, or like a COO kind of person. And they don't know how this works. And it's really exciting. We're going to be making cartoons, or we're going to be doing these cool videos. So there's something incredibly fun about that. And we can often take people out of their legal work into something that's a little more creative, to solve a big problem for them. So I think that's something they did a day. Those don't happen every day, unfortunately. Hopefully, every day. But I think that's the most fun part by far. It's really a blast.
Do you have a professional pet peeve?
Oh God. So a professional pet peeve. Okay, so you're taking some risks here. Okay, so like I'm the CEO, right? So it's like my job to like stress out about all the things that no one else stresses out about.
Yep.
So so when you're in the process of like selling a product, it's, especially if you're the founder, it's kind of your thing. It's really emotionally charged. It's stressful. And I often, there's certain people who are like email responders, like me. I'm always like, hey, got your message. Thanks so much. I'll get back to you, whatever. But some people, they just don't do that. It's not a bad thing. It's just a style thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's so many times I'm just like, I send the contract over, or I send the proposal over, and I just get no response. There's like 37 other things they have to do before like close the deal with Briefly.
Yeah.
But it's all fine. It's just a style thing. But like the not sending of like simple email acknowledgments, that drives me crazy. I don't know. Maybe it's just like I'm a stress ball and I worry about deals falling through at the last minute.
Yeah.
But I think that's like a little bit of just send a quick email. Say, oh yeah, got the contract. I'm real busy, but I'll get back to you next week. Oh my God, that would make my life so much better.
Maybe I should do more of that. That's fair. Yeah. I feel like I'm pretty responsive. I try to get through my inbox, but that's fair. Like even I'm not going to get to this for 2 days.
It's probably too much to ask folks to send those emails. It really is. I think this is just like saying, please assuage my anxieties. but it's a thing that irks me.
A book that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Ooh.
You can take this any way you want. Yeah, you know.
Okay, I have. Oh boy. Yeah, there's so many really good ones. All right, I'll take this since we were talking about video games, I'll take this in a slightly nerdy direction. Actually, maybe it's not that nerdy. So I used to read like fantasy books as a kid, and then for like 20 years I didn't read any. And I kind of got back into it during the pandemic. And there's all this great new modern fantasy. So I'm going to recommend two. One that are very different but equally awesome. One is called The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. I love this book. It's I don't want to recommend any like big nonfictions, but you're getting like fun fiction books.
Yeah.
So this is a book about a group of like master thieves living in this kind of fantastical version of Venice, and they're not normal. They're not like burglars or pickpockets. They're con men, right? So your hero is this kind of roguish, almost Robin Hoodish kind of con man who runs these elaborate cons, stealing huge amounts of money from the elite of this city. And it gets involved with this crazy conspiracy, and there's lots of adventure. It's really, really good. It's a series, but the first book can just be a standalone. Mm-hmm. So The Lies of Loch Lamora. And then similar genre, but a very different book. It's a book called The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I think she's like one of the most decorated science fiction writers. She won like, I think the Hugo Award for all the novels in this trilogy, like 3 years in a row or something like that. It's called the Broken Earth trilogy, but again, the first book can kind of be a standalone. And it's a book that manages to tackle a lot of really politically charged issues, particularly things like climate change and racial justice, in a way that's like incredibly compelling and exciting and not kind of preachy in any way. And it's just a brilliant novel. So The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin and The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch.
I'll be honest, I'm not a big fantasy reader. I mean, I mostly read nonfiction, and those both sound very interesting. I will.
Yeah, I think they're good. I think they're good books for folks who are like a bit put off by, elves and dwarves and magic. And
right.
Like they're kind of cooler. They're cooler fantasy.
Awesome. All right. As we wrap up, my traditional closing question. If you, Adam, could look back on your days as a young lawyer, just getting started, just out of law school, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then?
I wish I think I knew this in my kind of heart, but never really was able to live it. Is that when you get into the quote real world, the kind of trappings of prestige matter less than you think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like that Ninth Circuit clerkship I took that I really should not have taken because it was not a good job for me. A lot of the things I did that were to kind of chase prestige rather than just do the things I wanted to do and were good at. I think that's what I wish I'd understood better, and what I'd advise most, young lawyers or really any professional coming at us, do good work. Sure, does having a fancy law school on your resume help? Absolutely, but it's not going to help. What's really going to help is like getting out there and providing great value, being a good person. I think that stuff matters way more. Life's too short to make decisions based on what anyone else wants you to do in terms of, well, I shouldn't say that. We should do what other people want us to do, right? We shouldn't live our lives hedonistic and selfish.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean, right? Like, don't do things because like you think it's going to look good in your resume.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do that to a little bit of a degree, but really focus on what you're good at, where you can provide the most value. And I think that's what I wish I'd known as a young. This is especially bad, I think, in the legal profession. So that's what I wish I had known.
And someday move to the farm if it will make you and your wife happy.
Right? Yeah. Even if it slows your career down, these are the choices that make life kind of rich and interesting.
Adam, this has been a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract.
Yeah, same here, Tyler. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.